Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode. Today we've got somebody who's a climate activist and is currently going to school, medical school, to become a doctor in the UK. Amit Singh. How was that?
That's perfect. You got it right.
Great.
How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for coming on. And I wanted to tell people first off that you are somebody who is extremely active in trying to get the word out about climate change, but at the same time, you're actually confronting people at the COP meetings who happen to be CEOs or politicians that are dragging their feet on the issue. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences confronting people at these events and what kind of response you're getting?
Yeah, gladly. So like you said, that is the range of my work, right? And obviously when we go to COP or any other event like that, there's lots of negotiations, lots of discussions. But like you said, a part of that also includes people who are not on our side, confronting them and asking them what makes them go against us. And the response I've got is obviously range, depending on which side you're on, depending on if you agree with me or not, you get a range. But broadly speaking, I've been supported. I've been cared for by the people around me. And I think that's really important to consider, because when you go into these spaces and you challenge somebody who holds a lot of power in their hands, it's important that you have people to take care of you, support you, and encourage you in that moment and empower you, right? So what I've really appreciated is that when I've come back, or even in that moment, I've had people around me who are happy to support me, who are happy to help me process what just happened as well, because it's a very fast-paced situation to be in, which has been really, really important. And on top of that, the climate movement has obviously been in favor of it, and I really appreciated that as well. So I think what's kept me going and what's motivated me to do that is basically recognizing that people actually need this. That once I've finished doing it, I've been told that what I did was the right thing to do. And I'm not the only person doing this, of course. There's tons of other people alongside me who are openly challenging people alongside activism in many other forms.
So it's a difficult time right now because, like you said, you have people on your side and you have people that are not on your side. And to a certain degree, the people that are not on our side are very powerful. What ratio is it from, at these events anyway, that are on your side versus coming there to be kind of a shill and pretend like they care?
Yeah, that's a really, really important question. It is very hard to define, because what the issue with that is we don't know who's always on our side and who isn't until they make that decision, right? What I will say, though, is there are people who are against us, and those people do sadly infiltrate these spaces, or at times even co-own these spaces. For example, we've seen with COP27 that's coming up this November, Coca-Cola is sponsoring that, and that's the world's largest polluter of plastics, right? I totally hear that reaction. It is disappointing, it's frustrating, and it's really upsetting to see. And going there, you realize that you're going to be confronting these people, and they'll be under different titles, not always under the title of fossil fuel company, but they've got subgroups and, X, Y, and Z different titles that they come under. It's hard to realize who's on your side and who isn't. On the opposite end, however, you've got people like us who are getting in the spaces as well. We're pushing ourselves to get in. And we are fighting for that right. And you said something really important, which is people opposite us are really powerful. So what does that really mean for people like me and you who want to see change? And I think the reality is that means we have to remember that they might have money, they might have influences in high level spaces, but what we have that they don't have is 7 billion people at the end of the day, right? We have the human resources that we actually need to make that change happen. And we simply outnumber them. They rely on us to exploit and extract and divide. And if we keep that in our mind as we keep going forward, and if the people who are listening to this are not yet involved, but can be involved, and you have the ability to get involved, reach out. And I think the more people we get into these spaces, the more people we get to engage with these actors who don't want to listen, the further we get. Because obviously a lot of them are politicians as well, right? It's not just fossil fuel companies. It's politicians who are pandering to these companies. Now, they also need your approval as the voter. So it's really important that we remember that our vote doesn't only count once every 4 years when we're voting at a general election. It counts whenever we have a meeting with our local member of parliament as well, because that's the right that we've gained from having voted them into place.
And this is the same in the UK as it is globally. I'm from America, but I live in Germany now, but it's all the similar corporate interests are beholden to, or the politicians are beholden to the corporate interests. And are we seeing a lot of divide and conquer propaganda? Have you seen some of this firsthand?
In what sense would you expand on that?
Well, in the sense that corporations, like for instance, in America right now, there's a thing where Chevron and companies like this are trying to get information into school children's hands, ages 5 to 12. They're having these campaigns to tell kids that electric vehicles don't work, or that we don't want to make climate change to sound so apocalyptic. So what they're doing is sitting on the boards of educational people who are writing the textbooks for school children, and the lawyers from these fossil fuel companies are actually sitting in on these meetings and saying, actually, can we take out that one part and just say blah, blah, blah? This is a real thing. So examples like that.
Yeah, that's a really, really important point, actually. And that is exactly what is happening, sadly. To the point at which our current Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, Liz Truss, used to work for, I believe, Shell. Might be BP, but I'm pretty sure it's Shell. So you can see where that track comes from, right? Now we're seeing fracking being made legal, or being pushed to become legal again in the United Kingdom, which has obviously been made, that they've blocked it beforehand because of the climate impacts as well. So it shows a lot how having somebody in power who has been and is involved in those spaces, because let's not forget, she's still got friends there. She's still got people who are investing in similar things to her in there, and she's still going to be making money in one way or another through that process as well. So it really does go to show what the results of those powers really are. Now, we know that last year in COP26, Scotland's largest polluter was sponsoring the event. We know that fossil fuel companies were all over the place in the event, right? And they were one of the largest. I think it might have been the largest group, if not one of the largest groups that were present at the event. So we know these people are there, and this is why, like you said, recognizing that divide and conquer. We've seen this happen before, basically, in many different locations. But the one that comes to mind most obviously is the British Empire, when it colonized most of the world and literally drew lines on paper to figure out where the borders sit across Africa, right? So we saw divide and conquer in a very, very literal sense. But even then, we managed to fight back, right? There was collective action. There was solidarity being shown. We were pushing back against the oppressor. And I think this is by no means the same as colonialism, although colonialism has had a big, big role and is basically core to the crisis that we're facing right now. But we're learning from those experiences, from the people who were before us fighting for us. Learning from that, we have to start pushing against these companies and push for action through non-violent direct action, through lobbying, through policy change, through communication,
Mm-hmm. And these kind of what we're doing right now is talking one-on-one rather than trying to get our information from a news source, which is most certainly at this point bias. Especially to corporate interests. So you touched on something really important, which was Liz Truss. This, I'll refrain from using nasty language, but this is not a nice person. Okay. Mm-hmm. What is this current administration doing to hamper the climate activist movement? Like, as far as I heard that there was this law, and what's happening over there right now?
That's a really good question. So there's a lot going on, and I think that's the first important point to remember. That they know that we don't have the resources that they have. So if they throw 10 different things at us, we can only fight 2 of them at a time. Like I said beforehand, the way to tackle that is to get involved. The more people there are, the more we can push against together. So the moment we start showing solidarity with one another, we can resist those changes. But it is really important to remember that part of their strategy is to just overburden us and burn us out from activism. So that's really important to remember. Outside of that, what they're doing is a lot of different things. One main thing that you might be referring to is a policing bill, which basically restricts freedom to protest in the way that you could beforehand. And I have to say the way beforehand because technically you're still allowed to protest, but it's not the same thing, right? When they have the right to stop and search anybody who might be carrying a banner coming to a protest, that shows that that's not acceptable in any way. So these bills that are coming in, the policing bill, alongside, like I said, fracking is being fought for to be brought back into place so they can start drilling for new oil and gas further and further in the UK. We're looking at people who are refugees being sent over to Rwanda, right? Which might seem like it's a very different thing to climate change, but it's not, because let's go back to the roots of climate change and look at how the exploitation occurred in black and brown countries. Let's look at how oil extraction still occurs in places like Ecuador, where people's land is being flooded by oil spills, where they can't eat, they can't drink, they can't access local medicines because the plants are dying from the oil spills, right? So this is very much a colonial issue to this very date. So when these bills coming together, they are just presenting for the same fight. And that's what we need to remember, that all these things that are coming together might seem different. They really aren't. They are fighting against women. They're fighting against queer people. They're fighting against working class people. They're fighting against black and brown people. And we can all combine, because that's just one enemy that they are. Like there's multiple groups here. There's one enemy, and we can push, and we can resist, and we can stand up for ourselves. We have to remember the word solidarity and use that in our collective conscious as we go forward.
And you touched on something very important there, which is the prejudice that we have for each other at the moment. There's a lot of bad discourse. There's a lot of racism, a lot of sexism, a lot of misogyny, and a lot of homophobia, and all that kind of anything where they can take one of us groups and position it against the other. This is a wonderful strategy that works very well. So you would say that even better than watching the news and whatever kind of corporate interest might be coming out of the news, to study the history of colonialism and imperialism would help a great deal.
I think so. I think it's really important that we realize the roots and the present of the crisis. Like I said, the oil spills that I mentioned are still happening now. Those kinds of damages still occur currently. Native land is still being used for extraction. So that colonialism has not left us. It's just somebody else who's taking that role on now. That role being big companies instead, right? So there is a big impact. Even if you go back to Brazil and the Amazon forest, we're looking at deforestation because people want to get wood, people want to grow different plants and harvest through that process, but they only want to use monoculture, which is basically growing one type only, which kills biodiversity around you. If you've got one type of plant in one place, nothing else can grow there, right? So when we look back at that and we realize that the money that is coming out of that is going into the pockets of these rich people, people who are high level in agricultural spaces, like they are in fossil fuel spaces as well, we realize that this is all connected to colonialism, extractivism, to capitalism at the end of the day is what we're looking at, right?
Yeah.
So I think you're totally right. I think it's really important that we, especially in the global north, people who aren't in countries like Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, etc., people in Europe, people in Northern America, we have to realize our position in these spaces, but to realize the power that we hold to access these people that people in the south might not be able to access as easily. In doing that, we have to learn and teach ourselves what is the root cause of this crisis. And like you said, that is colonialism. And we have to learn about that. We have to engage about that. We have to converse about that. It doesn't mean that you have to only read books, because we also know that some books are biased as well, right? We have to find a range of different sources, but most importantly, reach out to people in the climate space. There are people who have their voices, but they've been taken away, especially in areas that are most affected, like I said, Latin America, etc., where it's most affected. There are people who are already voicing themselves. They're putting them on the internet. There's interviews, there's podcasts, there's books, whatever it might be that you learn through. So listen to the people that are being affected, right? Mm-hmm. Don't read the book don't simply, you can also read their books as well, but don't simply read the books of somebody who's a high-level academic at a university. Also understand from what is happening in those specific spaces and hear from those people. Bring that into your work. Bring that into the actions that you take forward.
Yeah, this is something that I live by. Is I don't just take other people's words for it. I actually, if somebody is my perceived enemy, I'll go and read what they say. Especially, in regards to the war that's going on, I actually made a point to go see, well, what are these other countries actually saying about the West? Because that's the epitome of critical thinking, and you have to be able to do that in order to really discern what's true, what's not. Take a look at both sides. What seems more rational? But colonialism, imperialism, but I think you're absolutely right when you say you can't talk about climate change without pinpointing capitalism and saying it's all related. Is it true that a lot of the agriculture in the world is very oil, relies on oil heavily, and chemical industries, which are kind of the same thing? They have to use the tractors to get the oil, and they grow a monocrop, ruin the soil, deplete the soil, and then pile in all the vegetables in an oil tanker, take it across the ocean, dump them in America, and then Americans end up wasting 50% of the food that's grown. So, and you're saying this is capitalism at the end.
Yeah. I think that's really important to note that, like you said, that chain itself that we forget about. We know the food is there. We know the food comes onto our plates. How does that travel across? It's really important to realize that. So I think definitely there is oil extraction that fuels in itself agriculture, but agriculture in itself is damaging in more ways than just that, right? It's damaging in the same way that oil industries are damaging. Now, when we look at oil industries, we're not just looking at the carbon dioxide that's being released into the air. That in itself is obviously incredibly bad. But we're also looking at, like we said, the biodiversity damaged by oil spills. We're looking at how people can't live in areas that have lots of oil extraction going on. We're looking at how jobs may be dangerous in oil plantations or in oil locations like that, right? So in the same way, it's that the same thing can translate to the agriculture sector, where if we are feeding so many animals all this soy, all this grown food, you can imagine how much area that must take to actually grow the food for a cow to eat during its lifetime before then we eat the cow, right? So there's so much more area being taken up in that process. Again, that means people are being displaced, that people can actually grow food there instead of live there. That obviously means, like you said, everything that you mentioned about the release of gases and stuff like that. That's a huge issue in itself. Monoculture, like we already talked about, biodiversity being heavily damaged in that process. And again, going back to how that links to us, humans are not independent of other animals. We live in an ecology, and our health is dependent on that ecology as well. So if we don't have access to a healthy environment around us, it does damage our health, especially when you consider that people are getting access to medicines through different woodlands, etc. as well, right? You have to remember that these chemicals come from somewhere, or if you want fresh air, even, we're seeing in London the amount of air pollution that's going on due to the lack of green spaces available, and it is shown to increase the risk of lung cancer, for example. So it's really important to realize that. And then at the end of the day, where does our health all tie into place? It ties into place where what I know is I feel comfortable when I walk out and I go into a green space and I'm walking with a friend of mine and I can feel comfortable in that space having any conversation I want, because that feels natural to me, right? You don't have to be somebody who needs to go out into nature to be an activist by any means. But a lot of people who want to feel better can re-energize themselves, regenerate themselves, and refuel themselves almost by going out into the air, enjoying themselves with the environment around them and appreciating the interconnection between themselves and the nature around them, right? But that's also really important to remember, that simply existing in those spaces is being taken away from us. And that's a really important, not just human right, but ecological right.
Yeah. And they did a study before. They put these people in kind of these communist block apartment houses, and they gave some people a little bit of greenery, and they gave the other people no greenery. And they tried to see who was happier. And undoubtedly, it was the people that had maybe a tree. Like just an extra bit of greenery made them happy. So for the people that maybe like, there's a lot of people that do climate change isn't real, stuff like that. But at the very base of it, what it does is it throws shade on the idea of biodiversity, which is even more undisputable than climate change itself. The idea that trees give us oxygen, everything in the right balance is what keeps us alive. Do you think that there's even corporate pushback and propaganda and division behind the vegetarian diet, for instance, which I'm a vegetarian and vegan when I'm really serious? Do you think that's something that would help this whole crisis as well if people started to think about stuff like that?
I think it definitely would. I think it is important that we realize our own role in these situations. whether that's recycling or it's eating meat-free or reducing our meat impact. Because like we said, there's so much pollution that comes out of that, not only in regards to how much methane that cows may produce, although that is a big factor in itself, also in regards to how much land is being taken up to actually feed these animals in the first place, to get the food ready for them to eat for many a year before they grow plump enough for us to be able to eat them as humans, right? So there's a whole chain there. That's really important to remember. Alongside that, there are many different changes that you can make. That can be what's really important is realizing where your pension might be going. Is that pension fund being invested into the fossil fuel industry? Is a bank that you're with, for example, JP Morgan, which is one of the largest investors in fossil fuels, is that bank also funding such damaging exploitative structures, right? So finding out where you can find safe spaces. For example, Monzo, I know is relatively safe. I believe Nationwide is also relatively safe. But do your own research. Go out there, check which ones you can get. You can switch your account to, and that way your money is not by nature funding the fossil fuel industry. But I think definitely as an individual action outside of those that I just mentioned, reducing your meat intake, if not stopping it, is also really, really useful and important. But at the end of the day, what matters is we need to do all those things, but until we come together to work together, change will not occur, right? So we need to start pushing, whether it's through a protest or it's through lobbying, it's through social media design. The reality is that everybody has some type of skill that they can use to fight against climate change. And it does not have to be a skill that puts you in danger by any means. That could mean organizing meetings and writing minutes in the meetings. We need people to do that. That could mean organizing the social media posts and making sure they're posted at the right time for a campaign to start. That could mean emailing your local MP for a meeting, having a chat with them regularly to see how they are actually implementing the ideas that you want them to implement. And if they aren't, push them to. Right? There's so many different ways that we can get involved that are safe, accessible, some that take more effort, some that take less effort. There's always space for you as a general to get involved.
So, but for all the people out there that were brave enough to clog up the jails and stuff, we like you too. So keep doing what you're doing if you can. But absolutely, consumption reduction, voting with your money. When you spend your money, deciding who you want to give it to, pension funds, who you want to give your retirement money to. So, you're going to medical school. Are they teaching you about these things in there, or do you have to kind of learn nutrition stuff on your own, or do you think that the institutions of education are a little bit corrupted by fossil fuels, or are they okay?
It's a really important question. So I think there is progress being made, but we're not quite there yet. We have, for example, I've had one lecture maybe on climate change and its impact on health, but that's not enough. And it's not perfect, because what we need is for people to realize how does that intersect with the rest of the world, and what can we do as healthcare professionals to make the change that needs to occur. We need to fight in clinic, we need to fight outside of clinics as well, right? Treating our patients is not just about treating the individual, it's about treating and helping the whole community to heal in that process as well. So I think that kind of teaching is not yet present, unfortunately, and that's why we have to go out of our way to find it ourselves, to access those communities where we can learn that. And like I said at the very start, the way you learn that is by finding people, and not even finding people, learning from people who are already available online, who have experienced the damages of climate change, who have much more learning and much more experience, through lived experience especially, than we do. Because they know what's gone wrong and they know what needs to be fixed better than anybody else does, especially anybody else in the global north, because we aren't seeing the details of the horror that they may be facing. So unfortunately, we don't get enough of that in education. It's a start, but it's not there by any means. Yeah. And we need to push for more. It's paramount.
It's paramount because it all leads back to health at the end. So
it does. It does.
So are there any groups out there that you could recommend that when we're talking about getting people interested and getting people active, are there some groups already that exist that people can maybe look up? I recently just learned about the Extinction Rebellion and the Animal Rebellion, and because I'm also living under a rock to a certain degree, and I was really surprised, and I thought, I'm signing up with these guys. I love these guys. Are there more of them like that?
There definitely are. There definitely are. And that's a really good question because, and by the way, living under a rock, I think we all are to a certain extent. We're always pushing against that rock to see what we can find out, right? And it's hard to. And nobody should ever blame themselves for not necessarily having had seen it before. The moment you do, though, that's when you need to that eye-opening experience be a moment for you to get involved, right? So groups that you can get involved with, there's tons really. Like you said, XR is one of them, Extinction Rebellion. They do a lot of protesting, so if you want to get involved with protests, you can do that. There's also groups such as Fridays for Future, which also does protesting every Friday. So Friday for Future, there's one all over the place, right? All over the world, there's different groups, so you can get involved there. Some that I'm involved with also, Green New Deal Rising. Health for a Green New Deal is one of the campaigns that I work with really actively. We work more actively in regards to policies, pushing politicians to actually act on those policies, and campaigning in a way that we actually spread the news about how climate change impacts your health, as well as how a Green New Deal would be a just transition that would allow for healthy, safe jobs to occur that you can actually access whilst also tackling climate change. Because it's not just about climate change, it's about climate justice, right? And justice means making sure everyone is healthy and happy by the end of our resistance. So that's really important as well. So I think there's a few there. And there's obviously local groups everywhere as well. So if you can find your local mutual aid group, find your local protest group, whatever it might be, get involved, find out where you are most useful, find out where you find yourself happy as well. Because if they're happy in that space, we will want to stay in that space. We don't want people to burn out either. We want people to be energized. We want people to be ready to keep on going because this is a long haul, So find people that you enjoy your time with when you're making that change at the same time.
Good to know. Good to know. And everybody out there, go get involved. And it's now or never. That's all I can really say. Well, yeah. Amit Singh, we're going to have him back again, and we're gonna hopefully not have to come back and talk about this again. But I'm sure we will have to. So, thanks for coming. And is there anything else you want to add?
No, that's perfect. Yeah, like you said, get involved.
Yeah. Take care of yourself and take care of each other, everybody. All right. We'll sign off. Bye.
Bye-bye.